Welcome to Talking New York Real Estate with Vince Rocco. Our show is all about the exciting world of real estate and in particular, how it relates to the luxury New York marketplace. But if you are not planning a real estate transaction in New York, we still have plenty of information you can use no matter where you are. Now, here's our show. Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I'm Vince Rocco in New York, where the state of our industry is significantly changing. So let's get right to what everyone is talking about. The National Association of Realtors settlement marks a structural shift in how buyer representation is defined and paid here in New York City. For years, buyer agent compensation was embedded in the deal and handled through the listing side. That model created consistency but limited transparency. Now, representation must be explicit. Buyers need to understand who they're hiring, what they're paying, and why it matters. In a market as complex as New York City, this change pushes agents to clearly articulate their value. The role is evolving from facilitator to advisor, and the agents who can justify their expertise will define what buyer representation looks like going forward. That is what we're talking about today. And here on set with me is J.K. Overby from Brown Harris Stevens and John Admonson from the agency in New York City. And they join me now to discuss. But first, let me welcome my listeners and my viewers from across the United States and all around the globe. This is Talking New York Real Estate. So let's go behind the headlines and inside the state of our industry.
Hi, it's Stephen Bailey from Roadway Moving and Storage. Listening to Vince Rocco, you know the right partner makes all the difference. At Roadway, we deliver an experience your clients will love. For specialized services and white glove care, choose Roadway. Want to learn more? Email me at steven@roadwaymoving.com or visit roadwaymoving.com.
Okay, everybody, we are back. So I'm sitting here talking to two established stars and big performers here in New York City. We've had a lot of change in our industry over the last year and a half, 2 years or so. But way back in January of 2025, we started hearing things about the National Association of Realtors and a lawsuit that was settled. And now it has really affected everyone here in the U.S. in how we are doing business, how we represent buyers, what the fallout is, what the goodness is, all of that. And so we're going to kind of break it down today to really kind of understand, because I really feel that a lot of agents still don't understand all of the ins and outs of what this NAR buyer-broker change really means. So, John, let me start with you. How is this settlement really playing out in New York City these days? Not in theory, but in actual, tangible deals closing, buyers being happy, sellers being happy. How is it really playing out in our town here in New York City?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm having to discuss that much earlier in the conversation. I mean, it is oftentimes being brought up to me within the first 5 minutes of a conversation. Hey.
With a seller?
Yeah, no, with a buyer.
With a buyer.
With a
okay.
buyer. Hey, how does this work? How are you getting paid? I understand there's been a change. Can you tell me about that? It's no longer assumed. We're not just meeting with someone and going out and looking at 5 properties. It's important now to take your time with that buyer and explain to them up front, hey, this is how it works. This is how I'm getting paid in this new environment. These are essentially some of the things that could happen when we're out there, and this is how I'm going to solve that.
Jay, from your perspective, how were you approaching it? And by the way, when you, John says right up front, when he first meets a buyer, when you first start working with a buyer, when do you have that conversation with the buyer about how things have changed? Because quite frankly, some people have heard about it, some have not. Yeah. I will go on record saying I have not had to have that conversation yet in a year and a half, almost a year and a half. All of my sellers have signed the old-fashioned way, 50-50 to seller agent and buyer agent. But, that's going to change at some point as it rolls out. But when you first meet a buyer, are you having that conversation up front on how things have changed in our working relationship?
Yeah, well, first, thanks for having me. Good
My
to see
pleasure.
you again, Vince. John, nice having you on board
great
here.
Seeing you, man.
So great question. I'm going to first just kind of add to something that John said, in at least my experience, is that I actually view it as everything's changed and nothing has changed. And what I mean by that is that I have not seen change that much is the seller incentives for buyers, because ultimately this is about incentivizing the buyer, right? And I find that that hasn't changed so much. What has changed is the transparency aspect of it. And I think that in some ways we perhaps were having those conversations. I've been doing it for 22 years, but I think that we're really now forced in a good way to be more detail oriented on what the value is, what the process is, who's paying who. So that's maybe a good segue into your question, which is it's important to have that conversation with a buyer immediately. And that, in essence, what the REBNY protocol actually encourages or requires. And that means you want to be clear on what your role is and then what your value is and the requirement of having an actual buyer-broker agreement. And then, of course, that's going to lead to your selling propositions and then, of course, the structure of that agreement. So I don't know if that answers your question, but upfront is important.
It does. And we're going to break it down, a little more as we go along. But are you seeing any buyer hesitation when you start talking about compensation? Or is it just kind of like, okay, John, great. I really need the representation. So if I have to pay, I'll do it.
I mean, great question. Yes, I'm seeing some upfront friction when we're talking about this. I can see the gears starting to turn in the buyer's head. Like, wait a minute, what happens when we get into a situation where the seller isn't paying the full amount? Where do we go from there? Yeah. And then I've got to walk them through that. So there is some hesitation up front, but this whole thing is about clarity, just like Jay was alluding to. So,
clarity and transparency.
Yeah. So
sure.
if you can map that out to them and make them feel really comfortable and, get them to understand like, hey, I'm your advocate. We're going to work the way you want to work. Oftentimes, you can get through that.
What about deal velocity, though? I mean, do you see deals slowing down or the amount of deals slowing down? Because now we're like, well, I don't know if my buyer wants to pay. There's also the what I've heard through the grapevine, agents saying, well, I'm not really going to have the conversation with the buyer until I have to, meaning I'm going to look on the system to see where, or make phone calls because you can't even find the commission on the system anymore. Make phone calls to find out if there is a 50-50 split or if it's, only the seller, whatever, and then only show my buyers, those types of apartments, which of course can limit what you show a buyer if you're not going to be showing all of it. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
So,
I hear a lot about that, by the way.
Yeah. So what came to mind as I'm kind of smiling is that, the one thing I don't like in the world, and I think most humans, is surprises, right? So we get back to the word transparency. We're probably going to say it, I wish I had a buck for every time we say it here. But that being said, transparency to me is some synonymous with actual trust.
Yeah.
So I feel that it's just really critical to upfront be clear that they understand the new requirements and then take them through how this is an investment in an advocate. And I like them to think about it from a standpoint, if they bring up the whole topic of, hey, am I going to have to pay a commission in any way, shape, or form? It's possible. It doesn't happen much in New York. But if they do get to that point, they're going to have the skill with me to actually see a return on that investment, because that amount will probably not be more than, it could be more, but what I'm hearing and experiencing, maybe it's a half a point, maybe it's a point. And then you can actually gauge, and you could gauge even if it's 3 percentage points. That's going to impact how we negotiate. It's going to impact how your buyer authorizes you to negotiate. And you can take them through. Listen, there's 1 percentage point here that looks like is going to be out there that you might be obligated for. Let's see if we can negotiate 2 percentage points at a discount and actually show some actual ROI in this process.
Are buyers actually willing to pay? I mean, because I get Jay's point and well said, but our buyers, I think about first-time buyers, right? At, under $2 million, because everything today is at least $1 million or more, give or take. First-time buyers kind of scraping together down payment money, closing cost money, including attorneys, whatever. Do they have that extra 2 or 3% to pay us, 1%, whatever the percentage is? And then we have to worry about, is my firm, I'm representing a buyer, is my firm going to accept 1%? Or am I going to take 1%? Because at the end of the day, I bring 1% back to my company, then I get my split on that. Was it worth it? So are they willing to pay. I mean, I hear all sides of it. Again, I'm fortunate so far. I haven't had to have that conversation, but I know I'm going to.
I mean, realistically, the buyer wants that taken care of inside the deal. They want the seller to cover it. But look, it depends on who you're working with. If you're working with a first-time buyer who's just been getting killed on rent increases every year, and they're looking at you with deer in headlights, like, hey, get me out of this, get me into a property where this isn't happening to me anymore. There's real value in that. So maybe they don't mind, coughing up the extra 0.5% to help them get out of that cycle. So I really think it's buyer mindset, where they're coming from.
Because I think, not to interrupt you, but I think, and again, I'm just playing both sides of the equation, okay? I think that with carrying cost, and we just did a show recently on carrying cost here, carrying cost these days being higher than ever before. I mean, carrying cost, maintenance, real estate taxes if it's a condo, assessments, thank you, flip taxes, if you're buying or whatever. I mean, all of these, and by the way, and I say this almost every week on the show, I have seen in the last 2 years double-digit increases in maintenance in most buildings, which is 10%, guys, or more, where we used to float at 3, 4, 5%, 5%. Everybody, the world was collapsing at 5%. Now we're 10 and more. In one of the buildings I work in exclusively, for 2 years running, 10, 11, 12%. It's like, okay, now we're asking a buyer to not only come into a building, buy that apartment for those higher carrying costs than ever before. And oh, by the way, you got to pay my commission. It's like full stop. Whoa, what's happening here?
Right? I think, if I may,
and again, playing both sides of the equation.
And I love this. So I think so much of this is perception versus reality. And your job, if you're going to be effective, is to really educate them on the perception versus the reality. And if, as rarely as it happens, if a buyer is in a position where it looks like they're going to have to contribute to that buyer broker commission, then what is the benefit? And if they get to that point, they should be like, I see the benefit here of paying that 1 point, because look at how short-sighted that seller was, because he doesn't know I'm paying 3% less than what I would be paying if I actually didn't have to kick in here. So it comes down to benefit. I mean, we talk about, they're going to have to pay. It's like, the reality is very few people are having to pay. They need to be prepared and educated to be able to step into pay if it makes sense and is benefit for them.
And wouldn't you agree, Jay, and John also, that it really now comes down to how well we learn to be better at conversation, better to negotiate?
That's right.
Because, in our business, it's always about negotiation anyway, whatever side of the deal you're working. But isn't it right that we need to be better at communicating, better that we show them where the value is, what they're really getting from us? By the way, let's talk about seller for a minute. So when you're having a conversation with seller, okay, which I have had, buyer agreements and buyer paying is one thing. You got a seller who says, and so far again, and maybe I'm lucky, right now, and that will change. But every seller I've signed on, and I just recently did 3 in a 2-week period, they've all agreed to the old-fashioned way, 50-50, 5%, 6% split with both sides of the fence. But there are sellers out there who say, hey, because just like anybody else, if I don't have to pay commission, I'm not going to pay commission.
That's right.
Or if I'm only going to have to pay 3%, better than 6%. Are you having that conversation with sellers?
I mean, look, it's down to market environment and product. I mean, if you're sub 1 million, that's a hard market unless your product is exceptional. So, I would strongly encourage a seller to pay both sides, because right now, that market under 1 million is lagging a little bit. If you have a product that's, completely renovated, turnkey, amazing view with a private terrace, something very unique, then maybe you can get away without paying the other side. So
I want to compliment that point if I could. So, absolutely, right? Yes to that. And I also know that, my first conversation with the seller is like, look, I know that you're aware of this NAR settlement, but commissions have always been negotiable. And this conversation is, how much do you want to incentivize the buyer? in this case.
You're reading my mind.
Because this is what you want to talk about. You want to incentivize the buyer. Now, they can test the market the same way that you have market conditions on how do you want to price. I don't determine the market. I might give them a range with comps, but ultimately they have to decide their risk appetite. And it's the same thing here. It's a risk appetite. Now, I have seen, and I think it's fair with some of the real luxury numbers, when you get into 15, 20 million, a lot of times you'll call and we have to get notification of, hey, what's the, the buyer commission? And on this side, and they'll say it's negotiable. Or they'll say it's starting at 2% or whatever. So those sellers are exercising that right, but I also think they're making it much more complex, and they're risking turning off a buyer that they even have to get into that conversation.
Do you think they are aware of that, though, Jay? Because when I think about it, sometimes I'm like, you want to say, and again, I haven't had to have the conversation yet. You're going to leave half the buyers behind because they're not going to come through their representation because you're not going to pay the broker.
As
Do you
John
have that conversation?
As John knows, some of them are aware, some of them aren't, right? If they, I guess part of it is if they listen to you, they're aware. Right. And that's why I always like to put it in writing like you do, John. Yeah. And it's like, I can always look back at that email and say, look, I told you this scenario could happen. It could actually impede the volume of prospective buyers coming through. I don't think that's the risk that maybe you want to take, but it's completely up to you. It's back to freedom.
Even though we as agents know, because we have to follow revenue rules and Department of State rules and the new NAR rules where buyer representation is concerned, we all know the new rules, and we've been living with it now for almost a year and a half. But my question really is, how many buyers and how many sellers out there have even heard of this, right? Is it very well known out there in the population? Because once again, I have not had to have, I had it once, I take it back, with a seller, the conversation, and he decided, and we decided we're not working with each other. But how many people out there are really aware of this? I don't think many.
It's 50-50. I mean, at the end of the day, they just want to know they're going to be taken care of. Can Jay take care of me? Is he going to do a great job? And am I comfortable with Jay? And then Jay sits down and says, hey, this is the new rules. And most of the time, it's not going to be an issue.
What does it come down to all the time, as we talk about in a lot of the conversations here? It comes down to credibility in you, trust in you, your authenticity, your transparency, explaining to them, hey, this is what we do today. This is the new way. I need to explain it to you. I need to make you understand what it is, and then we go from there.
Yeah, right? It's a big part of it, right? It's so significant. It's the authenticity of what you bring to the table. And I think that in the past, we've been in this business for a long time. I think in some ways we assumed. I think we still promoted ourselves. We still talked about our value. But at the same time, this new protocol forces you to say, hey, as you should, what is my value? What is my expertise? What is my experience? And so I think it's critical to do that. And I'm sure, John, the reason some of your sellers or buyers are not bringing it up or just trusting you is because they just know your experience and they trust you.
Yeah. And it comes down to experience. And we've all been in the business a long time, 20 plus years for Jay and I. You're in it, I'm sure, at least that long.
Yeah, a little bit.
So, we have to understand how to better negotiate, how to better talk and explain things to our buyers and sellers. We've got to take a quick break. We're coming right back after these messages from our sponsors. This is Talking New York Real Estate on the More Network. Don't go anywhere.
The Everset provides full-service staging and furniture rental solutions in the New York area. For more information, please visit us at staging.theeverset.com or email us at staging@theeverset.com to request a free proposal.
So, question to you guys is, how are top agents restructuring their buyer agreements? I mean, is it all pretty much the same? Is there a few little, things that are different? How are you looking at that, John, and how are you structuring that?
I don't know if I'm restructuring it, but I'm definitely asking, questions like what you're comfortable with. Are you comfortable with me getting compensated on one apartment or all apartments? Are you okay with this area versus that area? Time period, how long do you want to work with me for? Those are the kinds of questions that are coming up when I'm going over that agreement. And just being super clear about it.
What about what I indicated earlier in the first block when I said agents are not necessarily have these conversations right off the bat because they may find something where they're getting paid and they don't have to go down that bumpy potential road of the buyer saying, well, I have to pay you. I can't pay you. I don't want to pay you, whatever. They're really looking at opportunities to show them where they know they're getting paid by the seller the good old-fashioned way, right? What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, if you're dating, you should tell people you're dating. If you're exclusive, you're exclusive. So, up front, that's
a good analogy, JKO.
That's where it's just so important, right? To take them through the entire process. And one of the things, keep in mind, they have choices. I mean, John, you're talking about crafting an agreement that works for them. I mean, they're empowered, right? And hopefully they trust you. But there's two structures, right? There's the exclusive structure if we're talking about buyers, and there's the non-exclusive. Obviously, if they sign an exclusive agreement, if they purchase something, that we are owed a commission. If they have a non-exclusive, then they can date. They can use you for the properties that you show them, and then they can actually go with another broker. I put forth my commission, which is, typically, 3%. I'm worth every penny. I have to sell them on that. It could be less, but, and then of course I really promote the value of being exclusive. It's the same reason why sellers, there's very few co-exclusives or open listings for obvious reasons. It's the same thing here. And that's also a benefit, right? You get people that are committed and they're loyal and they're locked in as an exclusive. And again, it's all about, what wisdom, what advocacy do you offer that buyer? So they're like, I can rest in peace here. This is my guy. John's my guy. I'm going to, if it takes 1 year or 3 months or 2 years, I'm going to use him.
Does it make the conversation with sellers a little more difficult when those who know that they don't have to pay 6% anymore or 5%, whatever, whatever's negotiated? Does it make them dig in harder to say, 2 or 3% to you and that's it? I would imagine that, having that conversation the good old fashioned way of 6% that we split 50-50 is not an easy conversation anymore.
Yeah, it's definitely upfront friction. Definitely it's a little bit harder. But again, it goes back to product and environment. What kind of environment are we in? How can I incentivize the other side to get the price you want? Let's talk about that. Your bottom line is this. Well, here's where we need to get to, and here's how we're going to do it. And we're going to offer an incentive on the other side. Look at new development. You've got new devs paying 4-5% in some cases. Those guys know more than anyone their market environment. They know, the neighborhood they're in. They know their challenges, and there's a reason why they offer what they're offering. You kind of have to think the same way.
Jay, I wanted to ask you, because you play in new development a lot like I used to. How is that playing out on the new development side? Are developers still paying both sides of the deal, or are they not?
So how's it playing out with new development? I haven't seen it change.
Okay.
At all.
I haven't
In
either.
fact, I've got, as 200 West 88th Street, and they didn't bat an eye about incentivizing. In essence, they're incentivizing the buyer. You can call it incentivizing the broker, but they're really incentivizing the buyer.
Absolutely.
So they're not being distracted by it. So we're at 3%. And, to your point, I found that last year there were a lot more conversations. Almost every conversation with seller or buyer, a lot of the sellers would say, what does this mean for me? And you'd have to educate them about the structure. And yet at the end of the day, if you articulated it properly, every single one of my sellers, I think like John's, ultimately said, I want to incentivize the buyer and have a conventional buyer broker side of this.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. And I can't imagine that if that did change, where developers said, I'm only going to pay the listing agent, where on earth would they find buyers?
Right.
There's always that direct population that goes out and does their own thing. But, in new development, there's so many reasons why you need, an agent representation when you're doing that. And so I'm happy to hear, and I agree with you, Jay, because I haven't seen or heard where that's changed that much on the new development side.
I just want to make one other comment, because I think it's important for the audience, is that, there are buyers who will basically, their agreement will say, do not take me to any developments or any listings that don't actually compensate you fully
Right.
I don't want to be involved in that conversation, even if it says ultimately I will step up and contribute something. So that's something to keep in mind.
Yeah, and these deals can be structured. These agreements can be structured. However you need to structure them. And I'm assuming that's going to be based on individual buyers as well. Whether they're going to see new development, whether they're going to only see resale, whatever it is. 25 into 26, so we're in April. Jared Anton, who's a senior executive here at Brown Harris, and I kind of agreed in a show back in December that going into 2026, we've come off of a year and a half, almost 2 years of, high interest rates and buyers, running home and locking the door and hanging out under their bed because they couldn't afford, the interest rates would ever double in some cases than they ever were before. And Jared and I agreed that the problem coming into 2026 would not necessarily be interest rate, but it would be inventory and the lack of inventory in our industry here in New York City real estate. How do we look right now, forgetting the buyer agreement for a minute, how are we looking right now from an inventory perspective? I'm seeing a little kick up in that in my own personal business. What do you think?
Well, I think it's picked up a little bit. I think it happened late for a spring market.
Very late.
I think sellers are starting to understand, like, they're feeling better. The weather, they're getting their heads wrapped around the geopolitical stuff. I feel like market-wise, we're a little light on inventory. Sure. Yeah.
And what is the reason for that, Jay?
I would agree, first of all. And listen, there's three kind of boogeymen, really. It's certainly not the NAR settlement protocol. It's interest rates, it's geopolitical, and it's inventory. Yeah. Right. And that's quite the stew right now that we're dealing with. But it's also at the same time, I think to John's point, it's so resilient that the biggest driver the biggest impact, the biggest hurdle is inventory. Like, I have people on the sidelines that are ready to go. Yes. And even though interest rates have ticked up, they still know that they're, 6.5, and they may be able to get something depending on their portfolio under 6. That inventory is the biggest frustration. I mean, how many calls do we get, John, where you're like, oh, that's a fantastic budget. What are you looking for? And then we hang up the phone, we say, ooh, that's going to be a tough one to find, but we're on it.
Yeah. Why, or what is it going to take to get that inventory, relaxed a little bit or increased a little bit? Because, I'm seeing buyers ticking up and wanting to get out there finally. And as I've said for years and years on this show and just in my business, you can't keep buyers here in New York City down for forever. Yeah. They jump up eventually and say, I got to go, I got to buy something, I got to do something. How are sellers going to respond to this? I see a little bit of response, but are they going to kick in and say, okay?
Well, we first need more parcels so they can have more new development. I mean, on the Upper West Side, there's just there's really nothing. That's the first point I was going to make.
The point out, we need to get these guys that are in the off-market arena in market. There's so much of that right now. Yeah. Right.
Well,
let's go. I mean, get it out there. Off market is kind of fool's gold. I mean, I think. I mean,
and that fad, I think, will pass. And to your point, that's going to be something that's actually going to build the pipeline. I think you're right.
Yeah.
Not that I want to belabor the off market thing, but I don't necessarily understand it. Meaning, a seller should look at it like, my listing is not really out there. Who knows about it?
Yeah. I mean,
and how is my agent, whoever that is, going to effectively get my listing out there or make people know that it's available? How are you going to do that? And so I think it's a detriment, not a positive at all when it comes to selling a property and also, increasing the inventory. Now, listen, we have enough problems with inventory that's legitimately out there. Right. And so when you have stuff behind the scenes, it's kind of like, all right, well, so really? What is that going to do?
And I think that brings us back to our theme, right, which is education, right, about this off-market stuff. And I think more people are getting it, more sellers are getting it. And it's a matter of saying, okay, if you're off-market, can you possibly know if you can get the highest the market will bear? The answer is no, you cannot. Yeah. And where does it make sense to not have every single prospective buyer looking at your property to compete with one another to be certain you get the highest, the market will bear. And I think sellers are starting to understand that.
Competition is good.
Right. The off market has been kind of sexy, and even with buyers, so do you have access to off market? We do. We certainly do. And I've done a couple of off market deals.
100%.
But Yeah, I think that we're going to see a shift. I don't know if it's going to happen this year, but and that'll affect inventory. Getting back to your question, I think that'll open up inventory.
Well, that's what I'm
bit.
getting at too. Is we want to open up or find ways to open up or increase that inventory. That will definitely help. But getting back to the buyer broker agreements, are we seeing downward pressure on commissions or just a shift in how they're negotiated? I mean, obviously, I think there was a little bit of a downward movement. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. There is a little bit more pressure on bringing down the commission, but
On both sides, from the seller side and
both
from the buyer
yeah,
side.
exactly. I'm spending more time, I'll negotiate that a little bit, but I'm spending more time on making sure they're clear on how this thing works, really, and getting them comfortable with that. I think once you get to that point, we go back to business as usual. I think
We could look at the high level of all of this, but when you get down to the nitty gritty, Jay, what are buyers really looking at when we explain this, and what are their thoughts on? Do they even care that any of this has changed, other than the initial thought? Well, I may have to pay commission, and that may not be a good thing.
They care. They care. The topic is in the zeitgeist. And, last year there were more discussions about it. Yeah. I found that. And this year there are less discussions about it because I think they're getting used to it. People were challenging commissions more last year. I don't find them challenging it as much, but I just assume the conversation is going to come up. Yeah. And I think every time it comes up, it's an opportunity for us to be able to eloquently discuss, risk mitigation as a buyer's broker, and ultimately, having the most seamless process to ultimately meet their goal. Because this is all about the consumer. It's about the buyer to find the perfect home at the best price possible with the least risk involved. So I think people care, but it's usually a brief conversation and you move on.
Yeah, I agree. But again, as I keep saying, it behooves us to get better at our communication skills, our negotiation skills, and just, building that trust and credibility in our buyers, just like our sellers, because if we do that properly, we get the payback, okay? We get the dedication. Look, we all know in this industry, in real estate here in New York City, it's the most complex transaction than anywhere else in the world. And
Indeed.
I'm a firm believer, and not because I'm an agent, but I'm a firm believer that you can't really do this on your own. You need our help. You need our wisdom, our experience, our years of mitigating risk, if you want to call it that, or just trying to get everybody on the same path to a successful, close. It's not easy.
Yeah, I mean,
and without us, it's impossible.
I just think there's so much uncertainty in the market right now that the last thing that people want to do is reinvent the wheel in a certain way that's not familiar to them.
Yeah, well, reinvention always is one of the things that, I think I'm going to change the system or whatever, and it never really works. Yeah, right. You're right.
Vince, I think we've talked about this before, but I, have like to say that in this business, I think that the best value you can find is having a buyer broker.
100%.
In terms of just having an advocate on your side. I mean, folks that say, I can do this alone. Why would you put yourself at that risk? Why would you put yourself at risk where a seller their fiduciary responsibility is to the seller? Nothing wrong with that. But at the same time, why wouldn't you have an advocate? Now, the question is who is the advocate going to be? They need to be thorough. Yeah. They need to educate you. They need to have experience.
Right. And if we do our jobs right, we were talking before the show here about referrals. If you do your job right and you delight your customer, whoever that may be, seller or buyer,
that's right.
In the past, they talk to their friends, they talk to their family, they talk to their loved ones. And the next thing you know, you're getting a referral because what you did for them initially paid off, or they were happy with how we worked with them. So I like to believe that moves forward and transfers, to us again. And if we keep doing that, even if we have to have that tough decision about a buyer paying us, or have a tough conversation with, a seller that says, I don't want to pay the other side. I want to just pay you. We got to learn how to better communicate that stuff. Otherwise, we're going to lose all the time.
Yeah, I think, just like we meet with sellers, we have an actual business meeting. We sit down with them. We take them through a listing pitch. We walk them through everything from soup to nuts. I'm not sure everyone's doing that with buyers. I'm not sure if everyone's not carving out that time to sit down with them and have a real buyer's consultation. Yeah. And that is where you build trust, and that is where you build value. And I think if that doesn't happen, you're skipping like 20 steps. You're handing them the sheet of paper, and there's all kinds of uncertainty going into the process.
And they may or may not sign that. And I always say, when you first meet a buyer, even outside of who's paying the commission, it is important to sit down with that buyer first, have a meeting. First of all, how much money do they have? What can they afford? What neighborhood do they want to live in? What kind of apartment do they want? Are they pre-approved? You know, on and on and on. But there are so many agents out there who just, I got a buyer, I got a buyer, I got a buyer. And I talk about this when I'm teaching, sometimes continuing ed, and they all kind of look at me like, oops. Hey, you got a buyer. So what? What are you going to sell them? What are they going to be able to buy? Are they qualified? You sit down with them up front. I call it the prep stage.
Yeah, and sometimes that
you interview them.
Yeah, and sometimes that prep stage has to be on the phone. You set the table.
It doesn't matter. Yes.
So there's no surprises. In a lot of cases, it's
mine are mostly on the phone. Exactly.
But it's from A to Z. So then when you do actually meet them, at that point, you've laid it out, and there are going to be no surprises.
There can't be surprises, especially when it comes to finances. You know, there are times when, you know, I'm inclined to give them a financial statement to fill out as well. I'm going to email you something. Please take a look at this, fill it out, and we need it. And of course, you know, a lot of people say, well, don't you need that later for the board package? Well, yeah. However, if you don't have the money up front, we're wasting our time.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, come on, you know. It is what it is. Yeah. How many times do you hear about deals falling apart because, well, I didn't know I had to have that much money left over after closing. Well, we're talking about New York City co-ops, okay? Yeah. Really?
Yeah. Or the maintenance goes up and they're pushed out of their DTI and, you know, something crazy like that. I mean, this is where, Jay, you and I come into play and experience comes in and says, hey, I can protect you from that.
As you both said in the past, a little while ago, it's your experience, it's your credibility, it's your authenticity, it's how you approach the deal, the person on either side or sometimes on both sides. You know, it depends. We work for sellers and we work for buyers. We work for new developments. We do a lot of things, right? All right, we got to take another quick break. Coming right back after these messages. Don't go anywhere.
This podcast is supported by the More Network, powered by Brown Harris Stevens. Real estate touches every aspect of our lives, from design and architecture to investing and the economy. Now there's a way to get all your real estate information in one place. The More Network. With more than 20 podcast and webcast series, the Mastery of Real Estate Network is powered by Brown Harris Stevens, one of the country's most distinguished brokerages. Discover advice from notable entrepreneurs, compelling topics, and access to top global real estate experts. Subscribe to their YouTube and Apple podcast channels by visiting getmorenetwork.com.
All right, so how are listing agents and sellers responding? Are they offering concessions or holding firm? I've heard that there's a little bit of pushback in some cases. No, I'm only going to pay 3%. No, I'm not going to pay both sides because right now I don't have to. Are they holding firm on that? And are you able to kind of say, okay, here's the issue with that, and maybe you need to think differently?
I mean, John and I can only speak from our experience and also, you know, word from my colleagues. I mean, I find that there are cases where you certainly can negotiate that commission. One example would be with a developer where they were paying 2.5%, and you know, with the authorization of the my buyer, my consumer, we negotiated that up. We preferred to get it to 3, but we didn't. We got it to 2.75. So that's an example that happens to be a developer where they were willing to, in essence, offer a concession. They were paying 2.5. They ended up paying 2.75 for us. It all depends. I haven't had many scenarios because, again, I haven't had to negotiate because I feel like the sellers have put in adequate buyer incentives. But I've heard of others that have had to, get more detailed in their negotiation.
What, are more buyers attempting to go direct? I mean, we talked about both sides of that, through the conversation here, direct to listing agent. And we talked about the risk that they are, potentially looking at if they do that. We've always had direct deals. Direct deals aren't going to end. They're always out there. But in the new scenario, a buyer's saying, Jay, you know what? Or John, you know what? I just really can't afford to pay you. So I'm going to kind of go it on my own and see what happens. Yeah. What is the risk there? I mean, we talked a little bit about it before, but what is the real underlying risk there? And will they be successful?
Well, I
like to think not, but will they be?
It depends on, have they been through these transactions before? Do they have experience buying in New York City? New York's Jay and I and you all speak New York City real estate vernacular. It's different here.
Yes, we do.
So, do they respect the process? That's a big one. Are they going to just do it their way? If they're going to do that, if they're going to use the mortgage broker they met on the cruise they just went on, they're just setting themselves up for disappointment. So it just depends on how educated they are coming into the process, I think. Oftentimes it can work, but if the seller is offering compensation, why not use a buyer's broker?
I agree.
I was going to say, I hear those cruises are pretty good, by the way. That said, I found that last year, I noticed for my business, there were more direct folks. And I assume, I don't know for certain, it could be coincidence because we don't know, I don't have any quantitative data, but I assumed it was because of this new dynamic and there were people were nervous.
Right.
I would tell those, and I have it now, someone comes into my listing and I can tell they are newbies and they think that they can do it themselves. And I'll encourage them. I'll say, you're probably in a better position to have representation because I actually represent the seller. And this is not an easy process. And you want to reduce your risk. So I think you should consider that as a first-time buyer. By the way, there's nothing better than doing a co-broke with a really experienced guy like John, right? Where it's the most seamless process ever versus working with someone direct and you want to pull your hair out because you're holding their hand and at any given point in time, the deal could crater.
I've always said that.
Yeah.
Right.
Always.
So it's clearly a risk and it gets back to our actual transparency and education. Because if you're educating them properly, a buyer is going to see the value and say, why do I want to put myself in that position where I just don't know if I'm getting the best deal possible for that property?
Well, and we know all the banana heads out there who will take the other side of that, believe me. And believe me, there are a lot of banana heads. You hear me talk about it all the time. So you're absolutely correct. But from a legal perspective, either of you hear anything from attorneys that you're working with on any of this transparency now with, discussing who's paying what to whom?
Yeah.
I have not, again, but I'm fortunate right now, but I'm sure that'll change. Any legal potential problems?
I asked the attorney I work with most is Rachel Isaacson, and I asked her, "Are you seeing stuff happening, later in the deal? When the contracts are coming out, are you negotiating commissions?" She's like, "No, I have yet to do that.
Yeah.
It's all being handled much earlier in the conversation." So,
right. And if it's being handled up front, that's right. And the other thing that attorneys are doing, I can't say for all, and they are hardwiring in that contract.
Yeah.
That buyer and seller understand who's paying and who's representing who. So legally speaking, if that contract has that hardwired, I don't know what the specific language is. I'll let the legalese people do it, but it's completely, airtight in that case. So there is no controversy once they sign that contract. Have there been some negotiations in there? I haven't seen it because if we've done our job, then it's clear up front. It's in the deal sheet. Yeah. And you move along.
Because I sometimes think, and again, just taking the other side of it, what happens if a buyer may sign that agreement and says, I don't have the money to pay you. Therefore, I'm not paying you. I'm buyer, you're agent, I'm not paying you. Have you heard anything? I have not.
I have not.
Yeah.
But people are telling me out there that that's a possibility, right? People are people. But if you're saying all of that is hardwired into a contract of sale.
Well, it's two contracts you're talking about there. You're talking about the contract with us, and then you're talking about a contract of sale. So I think that most people, I don't know, it could happen because people are people, that I think that they would understand that they really don't have much of a defense on that.
Correct.
I
would like to think that.
And they would likely lose and have to obviously focus on defending themselves.
I think that scenario is coming up when you don't know the buyer as well as you should. You haven't sat down with them. They called you on the phone. Can I see this? You meet them there, and
where you get a street easy lane.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, things are happening way faster than they should. I think.
Right. But that was my point earlier, to sit down, whether it's on the phone or in person, if you can do it, and say, hey, prep time.
Yeah.
Got to know. And because not only do I need to know what they're looking for or, prep or journey, I need to get to know them.
Right.
John, your point is well taken. I need to get to know them a little bit, as much as I can, or as much as they're going to let me know them, because I believe in this business, the greatest people business in the world, if you can't know the people you're working with well enough, you're not going to be successful.
Well, you also,
I don't care what it is. You're just not going to be.
Yeah, you also need to know how they perceive you and what your job is.
Right.
I mean,
exactly. The way I'm interviewing you as my buyer, you're interviewing me, right? It's always a two-way street because they want to make sure that they're working with someone who they feel credible or authentic. I keep using the same words. I mean, experience. Our experience in this business after all these years cannot be minimized. It cannot be minimized. We've seen it all. All the changes, all the neighborhoods converting and regenerating. I mean, it's amazing what we've seen. And working 24 years for me with people, I mean, I worked in technology sales before I became a real estate agent. I thought I knew people then. Yeah. Wow. I did not. I did not.
Vince, you're talking about, a really important factor. We talk about our buyers trusting us. We need to trust them.
Absolutely.
You don't have to. But, it's a mutual thing. I mean, that's why we say partnership, because it becomes a partnership. You're as much as a partner as I am to you and vice versa. And you want to feel safe. They want to feel safe with you and why they're choosing you. And you want to feel safe with them where they're not going to make you look bad or do something that's unethical.
100%. Let's talk a little bit about the specifics. So, under the NAR agreement, we are now not allowed to post to any of the databases what the commission amount is. For sake of transparency, for whatever they want to call it.
They make it hard.
I completely disagree with it. They make it very difficult. And I'll go on record and say it's nonsense. However, we can't post the commission. So does it make your jobs harder when you're searching for for a buyer? I mean, let's be real. It's the first thing I look at. And of course, it doesn't say it. So I got to call the agent or email the agent. How quickly are you getting responses? There's another one. Is it important or not?
Yes. I mean, this is about transparency, right? So I got to know, how much is on the table, and I need to let my client know that.
Right. Because if it's not on the table, you got to.
They need to know. It's just about the buyer. They need to know whether it's in play,
right?
Whether there's any possibility, and they're going to probably know you're going to negotiate that. I'll be like, hey, Jimmy, if that's my buyer, and say, Jim, look, this one's a 2. And we're going to obviously look to negotiate this where you don't have to in any way, shape, or form contribute. But full disclosure, this is what we're working with that. But it's a pain in the butt.
Yeah. And I'm sure you get the same emails that I get when I have a listing. It's like, hey, Vince, I'd like to show the apartment, blah, 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 whatever, to my client, so-and-so. By the way, what's the buy side commission? I don't blame them.
Yeah.
They want to know.
Yeah.
Now, if I responded back to one of you or me and say, sorry, but you got to collect your own commission, do you think they're going to still want to show that apartment? I would say no.
Right.
But that's me.
And they have that choice.
Of course they have that choice.
And they have that choice. I always find it interesting. And
I'm not showing anything that I'm not getting paid for.
And fun when John, we asked that selling broker, oh, by the way, just so I know what's the commission, and they have a really low commission, and they come at you like sheepishly, it's 2%. It's 1.5%. I'm so sorry. You're like, okay, this is part of the negotiation. It is what it is. Doesn't happen much, but it happens.
Yeah, you definitely hear it in their voice. That's
and I keep meaning to, of course. Yeah. And I keep meaning to ask our manager, and I keep forgetting, just for kicks and giggles, what if a buyer says, I'll pay you 1%? We talked about that a few minutes ago. Yeah. Is our management even going to accept that? Are you going to accept that? You bring 1% back to the firm, and then you get your split out of that. Even if you got a very nice split, what are you making?
Yeah. You mean if on the buy side, at the end of the day, 1% is on the table and that's it? Thank God I haven't had to deal with that.
Yeah, I have.
Look, it's the same amount of work, so it's like, all right,
or more.
Yeah, exactly.
In these days, or more.
It's not like I'm getting paid less because you're offering less. It's the same amount.
I mean, we struggle sometimes, through the years when it's only been 2% or 2.5%, right, versus 3%, whatever. And especially if you're working in a co-op, board package, all that stuff. Yeah. I don't know what our company or our management would say to 1%. I don't know.
I don't either, but you get what you pay for, seller.
Yeah.
So you can be certain that the eyeballs on that, the traffic on that is all going to be impacted. The price on that, you'll never know, but significantly less is what I would say. I can't say with certainty, but I'm pretty certain that's going to be the case.
You get what you
I mean, it's a simple line, but it applies here.
Jay,
And it totally applies. I love
Jay,
it.
how many times have you seen a listing at 2% and the pictures look like they were, taken with like a Polaroid?
Right. It's about value. You get what you pay for, how you promote it. Let's just, I'm sure you go to your sellers and you say, look, this is why it makes sense for you to incentivize the buyer side and also what you're getting on my side in terms of what my experience is and what I invest. And this is not coming out of your pocket. It's coming out of mine.
All right. So with all that said, who's really benefiting from this shift and this change and the new way of doing things? The consumer, the agent, or the seller or the developer? I mean, who's really benefiting from all of this? And if we go all the way back to what happened in the Midwest that started this whole lawsuit, and the loss of the lawsuit is because buyers felt like they were not being told what they needed to be told.
I think
sellers, rather, excuse me.
If I may, John.
Yeah, go for it.
I think this is complete win-win. And if you had to rank, I would say consumers number one, and then the rest of the industry is right in there behind it. I think it's just about, again, it's about synonymous with trust, and it's about education. And we assume this was there. And again, commissions were always negotiable. It's just now that it's absolutely clear we have a protocol that everybody understands how this works. And I think the consumer now actually trusts our community more. I think that's another thing that's so important. We have an opportunity to level up our trust here, and the better communication, the more transparency, we certainly can do that.
Well, I agree with you, and I think that the underlying message there was to be able to level up and get to the point where we're more trustworthy. I'm sorry, John.
Yeah, I mean, Jay, I think you couldn't have said it better. I mean, you're really asking the agent to bet on themselves in a big way, and just like you said, we're leveling up. We're providing a better experience. We're providing more transparency, better understanding of the process. We're using tools more efficiently to make sure they know you've put a price on my service. Okay, I'm going to over-deliver. All right, here we go.
Well said.
And so the consumer benefits from it. And then agents, we've just gotten better.
What we hope. And
I think so. I actually think so.
I agree.
And I got to make the point. This is really important. There's a lot of people that think they can get into this business because the bar of entry is so low. And the beauty of that is guys like John and myself and other really experienced agents that take it very seriously are going to be even more conspicuous standouts.
Yeah.
And so
it gets us away from the car salesman stuff. I mean, really, like we're now differentiating ourselves. This is an opportunity for us to differentiate.
I love that, John. Yeah. Thank you for saying that, because I totally agree with that.
I mean, look at Jay. Look at him. Best looking guy in real estate.
I pay you guys well. Thank you.
As we've established. No, but your points are well taken. And, when I'm teaching, I say the same thing. It really comes down to our credibility always. And the more we learn, I try and start every day with learning something. Yeah. So if I have to learn how to be a better communicator, a better negotiator, better with sitting down with a seller or a buyer or whatever and explaining the reasons why. Hey, listen, we all think, sellers are difficult, buyers are difficult. They're really not. Yeah. They just want to know what they need to know. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And it's up to us to be able to tell them what it is they need to know. It's really very simple. But there are people, especially when they're newer in the business, that can't do that. Yeah. Because they don't have the wherewithal or the background or the wisdom to be able to do that. And wisdom is not age, guys. It's just wisdom in this business. But we have to be able to tell people what it is they need to know. Then they make their decision.
Yeah. It's a great
based on us.
It's a great reminder too and thank you for this podcast, because I'm going back and saying, geez, what can I do better? What can I do better? The other thing I probably can do better at is just simply asking my clients, how can I improve? Yeah. What was not communicated? What do you feel that we can have a better experience here? Yeah. And you have to be willing to hear it. Yeah. But there's gold in that, right?
Well, you got to be willing to hear it. It's very well said, because I think you're 100% correct. Most people will shy away from that and don't want to hear it. And there is gold in that, okay? Because we learn. Yeah. Look, I said before, I like to learn something every day. And I don't just say that. Yeah. I really mean that. A little thing, a big thing, whatever it is, got to learn something.
Yeah.
This mind always wants to know something new.
And this is a business where every single day, I love it.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
there's things come up that you're like, wow,
Every
what?
minute.
Ooh, that's fascinating.
I mean, I guarantee,
Unbelievable.
I would say both of you guys you get your business from your sphere, right? Right. You love your people, right?
I love my people.
Yeah,
I
I
love
love
my
my
people.
people too.
I love them.
And so if there's an opportunity,
And we're doing this about the same time. So
Yeah,
we've been
right.
at it for a long time. Right?
Yeah, if there's an opportunity to help my people out, I'm going to try to figure out a way to do it. Yeah.
I like the way you say that because they're my people.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah.
And they're your people and they're your people. This is what we do.
I mean, yeah, not only that, but
They're our livelihood.
absolutely. They've given me the opportunity to live another day in New York City.
John, it's so
Live another day in New York City.
I mean,
That's a big one.
That's right. That's right. And hopefully that's just metaphorical. But, that being said, it's like what I love what you're saying there. It's like bringing your service signature.
Yeah.
Right? Because it's all about service.
Yeah.
Michael Goldenberg told
All
us when
about
I first got in the
service.
business, he said, this is not a sales job. This is a service job.
Yeah.
And I agree with that. There is salesmanship involved with it and obviously being able to show people benefits, but it's about service and what's your signature of service.
And when we think about the fact that we are in the services business, for starters, that's what it's all about.
Yeah.
Last question, because I always like to end the show with, again, top performers, great agents. Where are we right now? What is our business looking like? We already are end of the first quarter into the second quarter. Do you see us progressing nicely, steadily, getting better through this year based on the last 2 years, or kind of status quo?
Yeah. Do you want to start? We were talking about that earlier. In
Okay.
fact,
Yeah. Let's see. I think, I think we're coming out of a slow time. I think we're getting, I think buyers are starting to feel more ambitious about things, even though there's a lot of noise going on right now. I think there is definitely some rental fatigue going on, which is giving first-time buyers incentives to come off the bench and get into this market. I think brokers are starting to share more opportunities because I think there are good opportunities out there right now, really good opportunities. So I think I think there's some momentum in this market right now.
I agree 100%.
So I think that's
Totally.
Kind of
I would agree. To quote Sarah Rotter, it's like for me, I'm going to have to be a little bit of a Seabiscuit this year because it's been
Love
a little.
Sarah Rotter.
It's been a little bit, and I can be good at that. But and I feel it. If you asked me a month ago about my year versus today, I would say, oh yeah, Seabiscuit can get there. But it wouldn't surprise me at a macro level, outside of my experience, if we had a year that was a little bit off. I mean, let's look at it. I mean, we still have some interest rate challenges, even though historically they're amazing. And we have the geopolitical issues and inventory issues. So some of those things could shift. But I do think it'll still be a very solid year.
I absolutely agree. I couldn't add any more or less to that. I mean, I think it will be better than the last 2 years. But I think as you said, there's a possibility that it might not end the way we want it to end, but I think we're on a path that looks, at least from what I'm seeing, that looks so much better than it has in the past. And end of first quarter into the second quarter, we're marching into summer. We'll be marching into fall on the holidays before we can blink an eye. And that's just how it works in New York City real estate. That's how it works in New York City. The greatest city in the world and the greatest people business in the world.
And we're so grateful to be doing this.
and
Vince, what you're doing, I mean, every day, I just am so grateful to be able to serve people and be in this specific business in no other city but New York.
I'm with you on that, Jay.
No other city.
Yeah.
I don't think I'd be as motivated to do this anywhere else.
Oh,
right?
exactly. It would be boring.
It would be boring. You jump on the train, you jump on the bus.
No
you're running
offense.
down the
No
street.
offense if you're not in this market.
Exactly.
But
especially when your day is like cuckoo crazy and you don't even know where to begin.
Yeah.
We figure it out. All right, we're coming right back with my final thoughts right after these messages. Don't go anywhere.
Hi, it's Stephen Bailey from Roadway Moving and Storage. Listening to Vince Rocco, you know the right partner makes all the difference. At Roadway, we deliver an experience your clients will love. For specialized services and white glove care, choose Roadway. Want to learn more? Email me at steven@roadwaymoving.com or visit roadwaymoving.com.
All right, everybody, we are back with my final thoughts. So, the National Association of Realtors settlement doesn't eliminate buyer representation, it exposes it. For the first time, the industry is being forced to answer a simple but unforgettable question. What is the real value of the buyer's agent in a market like New York City? Not in theory, not in tradition, but in practice. This is a moment of separation. Agents who can clearly articulate strategy, protect their clients in complex deals, and negotiate at a higher level will become more valuable, not less. Those who relied on the old system to carry them through will feel pressure, and very quickly. And for buyers, this shift is ultimately about clarity. You no longer passively receive representation, you're choosing it. The model is changing, the expectations are rising, and going forward, buyer representation won't be assumed, it will be earned. And that's it for this episode of Talking New York Real Estate. I teach my students every week to take a moment to really look inward and ask themselves, who are you at your core? What is your why, the reason you get up in the morning, your purpose, and the driving force behind the choices you make? What beliefs guide you? Where do they come from? Your family, your experiences, your struggles, your triumphs. Understanding these pieces of yourself shape how you move through the world every day. And once you know them, the challenge is to show up intentionally and be memorable every single day, not through perfection or performance, but by living with authenticity, purpose, clarity, and the courage to let people know and feel the real you. You can follow me on Facebook, on Threads, Instagram, LinkedIn, Blue Sky, Substack, or TikTok at Vince Rocco. And Elton John and Bernie Taupin always say, always remember how wonderful life is while you are in this world. And from all of us here at Talking New York Real Estate and the More Network, to all of you all around the world, thanks for spending a part of your day with us. I am truly grateful. Keep thinking the good thoughts, and I will see you next time. Goodbye, everybody.